Good evening, my lovelies. Welcome. I'm Lady Creepypasta. Today's tale is a listener submission. Today's tale is called Black Marigolds by Oliver Dace. So let's dive straight into it, shall we? Come now, my dears. Lean in closer, and we'll begin. My cousin Ryan Maygiver was in love with my twin sister, Marielle. She was a spoiled, demanding girl with bright brown eyes that matched her side ponytails. And when she died 5 years ago, our cousin was found asleep on top of her coffin. He had always been a little weird. I remembered my dad wrenching him off my sister's coffin and giving the poor sob an hour's worth of lecture. It was not as if it was going to change anything. Scolding the ancestral bastard was like throwing water on a rock and expecting it to melt. Ryan was not going to change anytime soon. He wasn't a bad kid. Dad said that he acted the way he did due to a messy divorce between Aunt Sally and her husband. There was a rumor among my older cousins that Ryan was a quote and unquote main source of support for our estranged aunt. I had no idea what that meant in my early adolescence. Ryan, for me, was the short, chubby kid who spent most of his time near the buffet table with a full plate in one hand and using the other to push a slice of cake into his mouth. Marielle thought that he might end up as one of those hoarders she had seen on TV. That turned out to be half true. Ryan's home, located in a small seaside village called Makara, 20 miles west of the capital, was easy to spot. No other house was a castle for metal sculptures. I counted 50 last year. Now, the number doubled. Not that his habit gave off an I watch you sleep vibe. I, myself, enjoyed collecting bird feathers to create miniature Christmas trees. The problem with Ryan's hobby, however, was that many of his collections were cheap $10 trinkets that he bought from a nearby scrapyard. It was a big hassle when 80-kilometer winds kept blowing his toys into a wide stream beside his property. 10 tin statues had piled up against a thin chicken fence by the time I parked in front of his car. "I'll smack you with a full bill if any of your cheap dollies scratched my car, Ryan," I said as I removed a small suitcase from the back seat. He waved me welcome from his porch wearing the standard local yokel uniform, a black hoodie over brown baggy cargo pants. "No love for your relative, Mabel?" he said while munching on a half-eaten strawberry cake on top of a guardrail. 2 seagulls squabbled nearby. "The only love you're getting from me is like the metal statue you gave me last year. Cheap and plastic." "You didn't have to chuck it off in a ditch," Ryan replied as he stuffed a handful of cake into his mouth. He pointed to a small metal statue of my twin holding a netball. A corner of her head was scraped off. A wooden pole replaced the statue's right leg. There was a deep gash on the chest that formed cracks along the body. "You actually took the effort to haul the rubbish back. Cute," I spat. "Next time try hauling that rubbish inside your car. Mark my words, it will sound like nails on a chalkboard." "It would have been a better addition to your parents' place," he said and licked the plate clean. "My mom doesn't need it," I shrugged. "My parents hang up so many photos of my sister that there's barely spare space for me. I don't even know what I look like sometimes, so what made you think that I'll take a dumb statue of my twin?" "Because I can't tell you two apart." I stared at the statue. "Looks better with rust." "It wouldn't be Mari without her signature look." He tossed the plate past the front door. I can polish it, Mabel. I can paint it with black and gold, Marielle's favorite color scheme. I made my way towards his house. I am surprised that you're not pissed at me for chucking a prime example of contemporary art. Is that a yes? He walked down the porch steps, arms outstretched for a hug. Do you think my parents want to be reminded of what Marielle looked like after she fell off a goddamn cliff? I stopped in front of him with a finger against the tip of his chin. His breath was molded Hawaiian pizza with a dab of mint and wine. At least you're here for her anniversary. Mari really wanted to see you. He enclosed his stocky arms around me. The scent of an unwashed, stained sofa clung to his hoodie. I let him, wiggling my nose away from the scent of his clothes. Just don't hump on coffins while I'm here, dead sleeper. I don't have to, Mari. I mean, Mabel. Yes, Mabel. He squeezed tighter. I pulled myself away. I threw my bag at his hands to cease any further comparison on how my dimples weren't as deep as Marielle's. Tell me you've cleaned my room properly this time. I found 3 cockroaches last year, not to mention that you forgot to give me my breakfast in bed. Anything for Mari's sister, Ryan said as he hugged my luggage close to his body and walked back inside late Aunt Sally's home. Only Ryan could live in a place that should have been a decent wooden bungalow. The sob bastard barely changed. My first encounter with my weird cousin was when I was 12. There was a rumor that our older relatives spread that Ryan had a thing about my sister, Marielle. As a naive 12-year-old, it made sense why he liked my sister, Marielle. Mari had always been a family favorite ever since I decided to play at our local pool rather than be at home in time for my late great-grandmother's visit. She wasn't prettier. If you held a glass panel between us, both of us would believe that we were staring at our own reflection. No, Mari had more attention. Mari this, Mari that. I got called Marielle more times than my actual name. I decided to assert who I was after my sister refused to sit beside Ryan. It was a dare. Our older cousins decided to check if the rumors were true. Would our short, weird cousin say or do something if he found Marielle sitting right next beside him? $50 were at stake if Ryan did something. A touch on the shoulder, sharing his meal, or granting an invitation to walk with him to the buffet table would be more than enough to win the money. Marielle refused. I decided to go instead. I was so sick of being referred to as Mari that I thought I could make our family realize that I, Mabel Maygiver, was braver. To prove the point, my older cousin tied my ponytail to the side and asked me to dress up in black and gold, Mari's signature colors. Smiles and twirls were the last ingredients to mimic my twin. I had seated myself beside him. My cousin signaled at me to scoot closer. I complied. Not a word came from the chubby boy's lips, except for the smacking and slurping sounds of the food that he was devouring. The house that his mother had given him was consumed by his new obsession. He had a metal table and a crafted steel sofa set on his lounge. The kitchen counters had bright silver paint layers that fit well with his metal stools, dining table, and a cutlery set that hung underneath a top drawer. Corrugated tin panels covered the dark brown walnut timber that Aunt Sally had preferred. Ryan nudged me when he walked inside. "Do you like the new project?" he said, pointing to a series of metal lips or buds that lined the walls of his hallway. They were positioned above eye level. Each was jet oil black with a touch of yellow that complemented a small black and gold gown that hung in my room for the night. "It's stupid," I said aloud. "And please don't tell me what you were thinking when you made them." Mari told me to make them. He pulled out one of the metal lips beside the door. Really? I gave out a small laugh. Mari? She always said she had excellent taste in art. I guess being dead has left with two choices, rot and ugly. What? She told you to make these? She did. He nodded as he passed me. I followed, stepping over empty pizza boxes and soda bottles. I wanted to ask if Marielle had ever called him a pig. If she had ordered him to clean up his act and get a proper job rather than be the oldest trolley boy in the country. I doubt it. The only advice that my sister gave me was to take on a scholarship to prove how much cleverer she was. It was a smart move if Marielle had indeed demanded that Ryan clean up his act. A whiff of passion fruit and vanilla wafted out and flew up my nose. It commanded my feet to walk faster. Empty chip bags were stepped over until I stood before a 5-star room amongst the clutter. There was no trace of litter. The sheets were dusted off. The towels were rolled tight on top of a counter. A bar of soap, a small bottle of shampoo, and a dozen lollies were tucked under a pillow. It was the only space where the timber walls were immune from the metallic disease that infected his home. That bastard even had a wrapped Dom Perignon champagne, something that went over his budget. Ryan prepared well. He must have been determined to get me inside that tight little dress I pulled from the doorknob. Do you like it? He raised his head with a smug smirk. I pointed to a metal lip above my bed. Get rid of that thing. But it wouldn't be perfect. Marielle said she needed it in each room. Yeah, nah. I'd rather have Aunt Sally's corpse than that cheap tin over my head. I laughed. Ryan grabbed my arm before he backed me against the doorframe. Alcohol oozed off his breath when he muttered, I can't. Marielle told me to keep them when she visited me last night. I grinned, shaking my head. Was she crying again? I asked. Screaming? Moaning? You can tell her to piss off next time you hear her. She's excited to see you again. He leaned his head forward. What, so she can ask me to dig out her coffin and hump its side as you did 5 years ago, Ryan? I mean, dead sleeper, I said. My cousin grinned in response, lifting the dress in front of me. It was new. The poor sob hadn't pulled off the $100 price tag on one of its straps. I pushed a finger on his forehead and threw back the dress towards the bed. Ryan watched as it landed at the edge before falling off outside of sight. Don't force me, dear cousin. I know our little bargain. You will have your kink tomorrow night, I promise. Good. He winked. He backed off to the lounge, picking up a bottle, and set himself upon a thick, dusty recliner. I shut the door, grabbed rags from inside a drawer, and threw them over the metal buds I found inside. I had always enjoyed jumping out of our parents' car and running alongside the Makara shoreline when Marielle and I were young. My parents usually brought us there every few weeks. Each time was spent racing my sister to the top of a cliff, playing hide and seek amongst the ruined houses, or walking along a stretch by the shore in hope of finding a seal or a penguin. Dad explained that the reason behind the visits was to connect with our Aunt Sally. She lived next to a wide stream at 13 Estuary Street. A strange woman with thick black hair and an apple gut. I confessed that I never saw her outside of a witchy light. Dad said that his sister had stopped contacting the family after her divorce. No other relative except my father was willing to take back the past. That was what he claimed each visit, but Marielle and I knew that that was all nonsense, even way back then. Half an hour was the longest record our dad spent inside his sister's house. He spent much of his vacation time flying his handcrafted kites. He had always told us that Makara was an ideal spot because the beach was a raw essence of nature. I choked up whenever my mind replayed my father's words. He wasn't wrong. The place was very much in touch with nature, that the whole village was as developed as a mud brick. The location barely had anything to offer. It was a backwater site, one of those middle-of-nowhere places to the west of Wellington. Wooden cottages with black lawns the length of a bus was a common architectural staple. A small seaside cafe that fed the local inhabitants was as old as the songs that the 50-kilometer winds enjoyed singing every night. I can hear them. Anyone could. If you rolled yourself towards the window, you could hear a siren choir of 100-kilometer winds luring the corrugated metal roof to join them in flight. Pebbles steamed through the roof valleys like boulders. Branches from nearby trees scraped its corners. Pounding waves from a nearby stream joined in a chorus that sang to the tired roof. Fly, join us, sing with us, lift your bearings and soar. Sleep became useless after the roof creaked for an encore. I rolled to either side of the bed. The fluff of my pillow was a poor tool to block the whistles and applause that the window emitted in reaction to the siren winds. I threw a towel at it. I sat up. I wrenched my phone from its charger. 1 a.m. It notified me before its screen darkened. Above me, the metal lips greeted me with a curved smile that seemed to stretch the wall upon which they were attached. Ryan rarely has a way with his obsession. Who knows? Maybe I will find a set of metal boobs hanging on my room's wall next year. It didn't help that lights streaming from a gap under the door illuminated all his sculptures. The little perv was awake. Who was I kidding? Of course he was. He must be rocking himself on his recliner with the same amount of dribbling drool as he had when he had been found sleeping on top of my sister's coffin. The dead sleeper sleeps again. I shook my head, making my way for the kitchen drawers with a small hope that there was a clean wineglass for my Dom Perignon champagne. Enjoying my sister's concert? I asked. He forced a finger on his lips before he cupped his hand over his ear towards the window. Can you hear it, Mabel? The winds, the waves, it's always the loudest on the night of her death. Marielle has always been a noisy brat. She can't keep her mouth shut for a second, I swear. See? Hear that? A break in the wind? That's her taking a pause between her sobs. Tell her to text me. I don't answer calls from strangers or dead siblings after midnight, I said, taking out a small wineglass with a smudge near the bottom. You should try and have a go listening. Why? I turned back at him while rubbing the smudge off with my shirt. Don't you miss Marielle? I gave a short laugh. I walked to my cousin, who was slumped on his seat. 2 metal lips rested on each leg. They weren't coated in Mari's signature colors like the rest, but were painted in rose, carmine pink, and a touch of desert sand on the edges. I hear that spoiled harlot's name every day. Do you? What is she saying? He turned his head towards me. Hear this? I pointed to my lips. You're listening to her every time I speak, Ryan. What's the point of listening to some deadbeat corpse when I got myself to remind me of Marielle? No remorse for your sister? Remorse? I pulled back his recliner until his face was centimeters below mine. You listen here, dead sleeper. People are still calling me by that hoe's name even after she died. You know how much it pisses me off that she's still infamous? I can't say a word before some random idiot calls me by that. Ryan pushed my chin until I stared at buckets of stream waters thrown against the window. Calm your little pecker. I brushed his hand off, releasing my grip on the recliner. The poor sob nearly jerked out of his seat. Pity it didn't happen. It's just the wind tossing out leaves and shit like dumb drunk pigeons. I know you can hear her. He narrowed his eyes and mouth. Mabel, if you really wanted to mourn, you should have gone where her body is buried, but, no, dear cousin, we both know how she died. That's why you come here. She is still calling you, isn't she? I moved to the side, knelt, and gave him a quick peck on the lips. Is it? And here I thought we were creating an anathema between two relatives. I still must get into that outfit. Maybe with side ponytails and roseberry lipstick to complete the look? Can you sing? I brought my hands on his cheek and held it tight. Mabel, not Marielle, Ryan. Am I not good enough for you? Here, another kiss. I gave you what you desired all these years, but I guess you won't be satisfied until I end up possessed by that witch. Not that it won't be a problem for you, eh? You'll be ecstatic. See, you're smiling already. I miss her, you know, he mumbled. His eyes were glazed as he turned to me, then to the two metal lips on his leg. He brought his arm over one and caressed his fingers at the valley between the two lips. I walked back to the kitchen to pour myself a glass full of champagne. And thank you again for sitting beside me all those years, Mabel, Ryan said. His voice was low and mumbled. The banging winds drowned the words that came after. Thank my sister for refusing, I whispered, brushing my lips before I took a sip. He was asleep after I drank half a bottle. His head slumped. The wind breathed its last not long after. There were no cries or wails of a long-dead family member. It was going to be a quiet night, an odd turn of events in this wind-swept little village that lay at the very edge of the country's capital. Mari, he mumbled. Drool dripped from his lips. The siren choir stopped playing. She will be here tomorrow, I whispered, giving him yet another peck on the cheek before I left. I tucked him into his chair with a duvet that I pulled out of my bedroom. I didn't need it anyway, and despite the weirdness of his fetish, Ryan deserved more than the soiled, unwashed blanket found in his room. If only he had known what kind of girl my sister was. I guessed Ryan was just a stubborn, naive mule who perceived Marielle as everyone's favorite niece at each family gathering. She was everything that he was not. Marielle was loved, cherished. She got what she demanded. Marielle had a future. I couldn't say the same for our cousin. Yet, Ryan still loved her, despite all the shouts, the name-callings, and the pebbles that Marielle had thrown at him. He would walk outside his house each time we visited and wave. Neither Mari nor I understood what he was saying under his lips because, for both of us, Ryan was a socially awkward boy with no one aside from his mom. That was what Marielle had taunted him with on the day of her death. She had stopped her car in front of his house. As fate would have it, Ryan walked out with an arm already raised. Sweat had fallen to his upper lip as he tried to utter another dribble. He held something in his hand, a rock or a metal sculpture. Marielle hadn't cared what it was. "Go die, basement dweller!" she shouted before she grabbed a full can of Coke from the back seat and threw it at him before he reached the fence. Our cousin trampled back. Aunt Sally rushed forward, screaming. "Mari!" I shouted as my sister raced away and sped up until she parked to the edge of the village. "What the hell was that for?" I raised my voice louder when the car stopped. My twin pushed her hand over my mouth as she choked in laughter while saying, "Oh, don't tell me you're getting soft on the basement dweller. How uninspiring of you, maybe. No dignity. I pulled off her hand. What are we doing here anyway? Celebrating, she answered, stepping out of the car. 5 more weeks and high school is over. We're finally getting rid of all that time sitting at our desk and listening to our teachers fanning over imaginary numbers or some other bullshit. Do you think it's early for that? I stepped out. Always the spoiled sport, maybe. God, no wonder no one likes to be around you. Cheer up, sis. I got something for both of us. My future will be bright, and I need you to cheer me up. Marielle pulled out a set of 12 cans of beer from the trunk. Heineken? I asked after she set the pack on my arms. Where did you... Just drink up. You can't always be straight up, Mabel. Marielle said as she took and emptied a can in 2 huge sips. There. Not that hard, eh, sis? We better head up before Beelzebub's fat, ugly mother will come running this way. You shouldn't have hit him, I protested. Why? She threw the can into the sea. You like him? Marielle, I paused. What the hell are you... She wrapped her arms around her sides and laughed. Oh, fuck, is that a confession? And I thought you weren't low enough for me. Our family really is cursed with incest. Did it get to you too, maybe? Have a desire to make up and breed children with webbed feet? Will you just shut up? Will you join me up the trail? Marielle took a second can and made her way to the same trail that we had walked countless of times as children. I had hoped that she would make a sudden dash to the top. That was her only way to win over me. Marielle would grab pebbles along the way and throw them at me once I had managed to catch up. My sister had always been a sore loser. She could never get it in her head that I was faster than her, making up excuses like how I wore running shoes or how I hadn't eaten a full meal. She bounced the empty can on her hand when she stopped and stared at me from the trail's welcome sign. I followed her, raising both my hands to say, I'm not running, sis. Despite being the summer months with the nighttime to come in another hour, there weren't a lot of people at 8 o'clock. Most, if not all, of the hikers we encountered were making their way home. The temperature had gone down since we left our car. The sun was still up, but would soon make its own trek down the horizon. Remember what our father used to say? Marielle said as she walked in front. That maraca would blow away our past if we looked straight dead-eye into it. I always thought it was super cringy. Well, he has to make some use with the $6,000 he spent on a philosophy major. The liberal arts are all ideals and no work. She stared at me. But you know what, maybe? Since school is almost finished, Dad's saying has a new meaning. Like what? What do you think? She ignored my question. Any thoughts? I asked first, Mari. My sister persisted. I don't care. I want to know the thoughts of the girl who got the highest score in our scholarship exam. Must be nice, isn't it? It was a mock exam. She shrugged. So? That means that the test doesn't mean anything, you idiot. Its only use is for the teachers to find out any weak points on the subject. I bet none of those questions will appear in the real test anyway. But you are still the first, she said. Gone was her smile when we left the car. She pursed her lips and kept her gaze as she emptied her 4th can. Must be a nice feeling, right, you weirdo? Of course, I winked at her. Being a sore loser again, Mari? Fuck, you're cranky. How about we head down and get ourselves some real food? Shut up! She stomped her foot. Is this what all this is about? An exam? I asked. It's not just an exam, you imbecile. It's our future. The maraca winds blurred out my sister's screams. I got it why we came here. An argument as loud as this was a phone call before the police could intervene. Calm your tits, Mari. Are you deaf? I already said that the test will be worthless. You got a chance anyway. You're right. Her voice trailed down. I watched her chew her thumb and threw the emptied can over the cliff once she finished. There she goes again, I thought. She was giving me the silent treatment once she realized she lost. "It's quite the money, though," I said, trying to cheer my sister up. I picked up the pace until I managed to walk beside her. "A $30,000 scholarship for the person with the highest score. I heard that 80% of all students are taking the test nationwide." "But none of those twats are going to beat us," Mari said, chewing her thumb. "That leaves with only you and me. Who will it be? Me, the future veterinarian who will one day operate on lions, tigers, and bears, or the future celebrity psychiatrist for the big names in sport. We could lose, but that is where student loans get in the picture, though," I said. The old ruined house was coming into view. "I'm not going to spend my prime years in debt," Mari said. I shrugged. "One of us might have to." "And I think you're going to take that burden, maybe." "Me?" I pointed to myself. Marielle stopped. Her back was turned against the cliff. "Drop it," she ordered. "Drop the test." "Why the hell would I do that?" She grinned. "Because no one is rooting for you, Mabel. You're an introvert and an airhead who hates people because you don't have any real friends. And you're just a stuck-up bitch who wants to get things her way. Friends? People only hang out with you because you're hiding your shitty personality from them," I answered. "At least I got people. Do you, maybe?" She shook her head, covering her mouth to hide her laugh. "What's your point? You know I am not going to quit just because my entitled sister says so." She raised her phone and brought up a number of some random guy named Darren Welsh. "How about a bet?" she said. "I can help you reach your goal if you quit the test. See this number? He has connections with an established veterinarian school overseas. He promised to show you the ropes if you do what I asked." "And I bet that rope is under his pants," I laughed. "Is that a no?" Marielle looked back at her phone. "I shouldn't be surprised from an antisocial freak like you." I cleared my throat before saying, "That's why I want to work with animals." "Are you into bestiality, maybe?" She smiled, flicking her phone. "You're quite the sexual deviant, eh? Just give it up, Mari, and let me do the test as usual. Let's keep it level playing field. Who knows, you might take the first prize and get to achieve your dreams." "You know I'm not going to risk that. Level playing field? You? Don't talk horseshit to me." "Scared?" I crossed my arms. "Does little Mari need a pat on the head?" She looked at me hard before setting her sights on her phone. Her finger stopped scrolling and she glared at me with those sharp, bright brown eyes of hers. "No other rope to take you off the test?" she said slowly. "Nothing at all?" "You know I'm not fond of ropes." "Really?" She leaned forward with a hand cupped over her ear. "Am I really hearing that? Mabel not fond of ropes? No, that can't be true, because I know someone who has your legs up on a noose." I stepped forward. "What are you getting at?" "Give it up," Marielle commanded as she showed me a photo depicting me and our science teacher inside one of the bathrooms. "Marielle, where the fuck did you get that? You looked like you were having fun. Do I spot a moan there, sis? Was the rope too fucking tight for you?" "Mari!" She grinned, pointing a finger at my chest. "Don't underestimate me. A girl like you has no chance for connections," she grinned. "All this for a test? You can't be serious. This will ruin both of us." I stepped closer to her. "I didn't take the picture, maybe. And this phone isn't even mine," she said, lifting one foot over the other while seizing me by the collar. "I'll be scot-free if I push this button. So, let me hear you say that one word. Say it. Say you surrender." I held both her shoulders, screaming, "We are sisters, Marielle! For God's sake! We shouldn't be treating each other like this." "Say it," she flicked her tongue over her lips. "Let me taste those words." "Marielle, say it! Don't you dare! Say it now or your future is damned." Had I meant to push Marielle off the cliff? Of course I did. but why risk what was left of my future for the truth? I had told the police that she had fallen off by accident after we got ourselves intoxicated. One moment we were getting excited about what to do after graduation, the next she was gone. Her body, and more importantly the blackmail, was torn by the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. I told them that it was not meant to happen, that we celebrated the end of the year too early. The police doubted my story, of course. I was the only person present at the time of her death, but my lies and my tears won out in the end. They ruled my sister's death accidental and charged me with 1 year's worth of community service. Happy ending? Far from it. Mari won. She got what she wanted. It was because of her death that I had been unable to attend the actual exam. I couldn't even enroll in my university of choice, and I ended up going to some lowly rated school that I had picked at random. 5 years later, and that girl was still as demanding as she was persistent. I could hear her as I stood in front of a stone memorial. The winds had a soft murmur with them. Listen to it. Face the ear towards the sea, and there was a slight chance that a plea can be heard. Bring me justice. Listen to my story. Help me, it says. Each new gust made her cries louder. It made me sick. I balled both hands into a fist and stomped on her memorial until the stone sculpture tilted backwards. You don't deserve peace, you wretch, I screamed. My feet pounded it until the sides of my left shoe cracked open. Marielle had always been a selfish, spoiled bitch who wanted everything with the snap of her fingers. She ruined my career, my future, my reputation, and now was the time for her to act like a victim? Give me a fucking break. I could have been traveling the world, giving aid to endangered species, rather than being stuck at a job I never wanted. She doesn't deserve peace, and I am willing to spend what is left of my own life to hide that truth. You can have peace after I am dead, I shouted to the empty air, my sister, who wasn't there. Then, from my position at the top of the cliff, I spotted our cousin, heading towards the beach. He looked up. I waved and laughed as he raised a black and gold dress over his head. Ryan had always been a weirdo. He was our strange, unkept cousin with a fetish for his relatives. I wondered what Mari must have thought now that the only person who listened to her cries and believed in her was the one person she hated. I loved the bloody irony in that. He had told me that he knew the real story, that I had pushed my sister off the cliff on purpose because I didn't want anyone to shed light on my short affair with a school staff member. He also claimed that my sister called out for help from within her coffin. That was why he had climbed on top of it. When I asked her what I should do to buy his silence, I realized it was a win-win situation. I don't mind at all. I am going to live the rest of my life free from the repercussions of my sister's ego, while Ryan enjoys the benefit of me dressing and acting like his favorite, beloved, departed cousin for a few days. Why not? He listens to the cries and wails of my sister every night. That was the closest he could be to his true love. Dressing up as my dead sister was a small reward for his silence. I started to walk down towards him, then stopped and stared back at my sister's stone memorial. Keep haunting him more, Mari. You know the dead sleeper loves it. A horror story with a different sort of feel to it, don't you think, my dears? Let me know what your thoughts are. If you're listening on YouTube, leave me a comment below. If you're listening on the podcast, send me a message on social media. I am Lady McCreepster on both Facebook and Twitter. If you, like Oliver, would like me to consider a story for this channel, send it to me at lady.mccreepster@gmail.com. That's all I have for you this evening, my dears. Till next time, sweet dreams.